husband threw his black wife like a trash, unaware she is owner of his firm. The champagne flute trembled slightly in Carmen Brooks' manicured hand as she watched her husband-to-be charm another group of investors across the hotel ballroom. 6 months ago, she would have called it confidence. Now, watching Darren's practiced smile and rehearsed gestures, she wondered if what she'd mistaken for charm was actually calculated ambition. "Second thoughts?" her best friend Maya whispered, appearing beside her in a swirl of emerald silk. Carmen steadied the glass and forced a smile. "Just wedding jitters." But it wasn't jitters. It was the same instinct that had helped her survive in tech boardrooms full of men who assumed she was there to take notes, not lead the meeting. The same instinct that had whispered warnings when venture capitalists tried to lowball her initial funding requests. The same instinct that was now telling her to protect what she'd built, at all costs. 3 years earlier, Carmen had been a different person. Fresh out of MIT with dual degrees in computer science and financial engineering, she'd landed at Goldman Sachs as one of their youngest algorithmic trading specialists. Her father, Marcus Brooks, had been proud but not surprised. As one of the first black partners at a major investment firm in the 80s, he'd always told her that brilliance wasn't enough. You needed strategy, patience, and sometimes, the wisdom to hide your true power until the right moment. She'd learned that lesson the hard way during her Goldman days. Despite creating trading algorithms that generated millions in profit, she watched white male colleagues take credit for her innovations. The final straw came when her supervisor, a mediocre Ivy League legacy hire, presented her revolutionary risk assessment model to the board as his own work. That night, staring at her father's photo on her desk, he'd passed from a heart attack 2 years prior, Carmen made a decision. She wouldn't just be another brilliant black woman helping others build empires. She would build her own. Her father's old connections proved invaluable. Marcus Brooks had mentored dozens of successful investors over his career, and many still felt a debt of gratitude to his memory. When Carmen approached them with her vision for a fintech startup that would democratize high-level trading algorithms for smaller investors, they listened. When she showed them her prototype, a platform that could predict market movements with 89% accuracy, they opened their checkbooks. But Carmen had learned to be careful. Too many stories existed of brilliant founders being pushed out of their own companies once they became profitable. So she did something unconventional. She made herself invisible. The company was structured through a complex web of shell entities and holding companies. On paper, Maya Chun was the CEO and primary founder of Innovate Tech Solutions. Carmen was listed simply as a strategic advisor, with a modest 5% stake. In reality, Carmen controlled 67% of the company through various entities, held all the intellectual property rights, and had final veto power over major decisions. Only Maya and their lawyer knew the truth. It was at the FinTech Innovation Conference in Manhattan where she met Darren Williams. Carmen had been presenting a sanitized version of their platform's capabilities, careful not to reveal too much, when she noticed him in the audience. Tall, well-dressed, with the kind of confident posture that commanded attention. When he approached her after the presentation, his opening line wasn't about her technology or her company. Instead, he said, "You're brilliant, but you're holding back." Why? The question caught her off guard. Most people, especially men in the industry, didn't notice subtlety. They heard what they wanted to hear and moved on. But Darren had seen through her careful presentation to the intelligence beneath. "Maybe I have my reasons," she'd replied, intrigued despite herself. "Maybe you do." He'd smiled, extending his hand. "Darren Williams. I'd love to hear them over dinner." That dinner led to another, then weekend trips to the Hamptons, then late-night conversations about dreams and ambitions. Darren worked in business development for a mid-tier consulting firm, but his real passion was entrepreneurship. He spoke eloquently about building something meaningful, about creating wealth that could impact communities, about proving that people like them, successful black professionals, could play in the same leagues as old money families. Carmen found herself drawn to his vision, even as a small voice in her head urged caution. When Darren talked about building an empire together, she wondered what he meant. When he mentioned wanting a partner who understood the game, not just someone beautiful to hang on his arm, she felt seen in a way she hadn't experienced before. 6 months into their relationship, Darren proposed during a weekend getaway to Napa Valley. The ring was modest but elegant, clearly the most he could afford on his consultant's salary. Carmen said yes, touched by the gesture, but also calculating. A marriage would provide perfect cover for her growing wealth. Joint assets, shared addresses, combined social circles. It would be easier to explain her success as ours, rather than hers alone. The wedding planning revealed cracks in the foundation. Darren had opinions about everything: the venue, too modest for his taste; the guest list, not enough; influential people, and especially the prenup, which he reluctantly signed after Carmen's lawyer made it seem routine rather than protective. "I just want to make sure we're building something together," Darren had said during one particularly tense conversation about finances. "I don't want to be Mr. Carmen Brooks." "You won't be," Carmen assured him, meaning it differently than he understood. What Darren didn't know was that Innovate Tech Solutions had just closed its Series B funding round, valuing the company at $200 million. What he didn't know was that Carmen's algorithms were already being quietly tested by 3 major investment banks. What he didn't know was that the side tech consulting work Carmen claimed to do actually involved running strategy meetings with former Treasury officials and Fed economists. As they moved into their new luxury loft in Tribeca, a stunning 3,000 square foot space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Hudson River, Darren marveled at their good fortune. "Your consulting business must be doing really well," he'd said, running his hand along the Italian marble kitchen countertops. "We're doing fine," Carmen replied, not technically lying. In her mind, we meant her and Maya, not her and Darren. The loft was indeed paid for by her company's success, though the paper trail led through 2 shell companies and a real estate investment trust. To anyone looking, including Darren, it appeared that Carmen had simply gotten lucky with some tech consulting contracts. Their first month as newlyweds felt like an extended honeymoon. Darren loved playing host in their new space, inviting colleagues and friends over for dinner parties where he could showcase their lifestyle. Carmen noticed how he introduced her. "My brilliant wife, she's doing some fascinating work in financial tech." Always vague enough to sound impressive without revealing specifics. But Carmen was getting restless. Building the company in secret meant long hours disguised as client calls and consulting meetings. It meant celebrating major milestones alone or with Maya, while pretending to Darren that her biggest achievement of the week was landing a small software upgrade contract. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd built a platform designed to give smaller investors access to sophisticated trading tools, democratizing financial power, while keeping her own husband in the dark about her capabilities. But every time she considered telling him the truth, something held her back. Maybe it was the way he sometimes looked at her when she discussed complex financial concepts, a flicker of surprise that she could keep up with his business school vocabulary. Maybe it was how he mentioned, seemingly casually, that he hoped to be the primary breadwinner in their relationship eventually. Maybe it was pure instinct, honed by years of watching brilliant women get minimized and sidelined. Whatever the reason, Carmen kept her secret. She let Darren believe she was talented but not transformative, successful but not powerful, smart but not strategic. She let him think their beautiful life was the result of her modest consulting income and his growing career prospects. What Carmen didn't anticipate was how keeping this secret would change her. Each day of pretending to be smaller than she was felt like a small betrayal of everything her father had taught her. Each evening of listening to Darren's advice about networking and building influence, while knowing she already had more power than he could imagine, created a distance between them that no amount of physical intimacy could bridge. As their first anniversary approached, Carmen made a decision. Innovate Tech was ready for its next phase, going public, expanding internationally, becoming the industry leader she'd always envisioned. But first, she needed to test something. She needed to see who Darren really was when the stakes were raised. She had Maya start looking for mid-level business development positions at growing fintech companies. Nothing too obvious, Nothing that would immediately reveal the connection. Just an opportunity for Darren to prove himself in an environment where Carmen could watch him operate. What she discovered would change everything. 1 year later, Darren walked through the gleaming lobby of Innovate Tech Solutions, adjusting his new silk tie and checking his reflection in the polished marble walls. The job opportunity had come through a headhunter, a mid-level strategist position at one of the hottest fintech startups in Manhattan. The salary was nearly double what he'd been making at his consulting firm, and the equity package promised real wealth if the company went public as expected. "Welcome to the team," said Jennifer Walsh, the COO who had conducted his final interview. "You'll be working directly with our algorithmic trading division, helping expand our client base in the institutional market." Darren smiled confidently. This was exactly the kind of opportunity he'd been waiting for, a chance to prove himself at a company that actually mattered. He'd researched Innovate Tech thoroughly before interviewing. Founded 3 years ago by Maya Chin, the company had revolutionized automated trading for mid-market investors. Their proprietary algorithms could predict market movements with unprecedented accuracy, and major investment banks were already licensing their technology. What Darren didn't know, what Carmen had made sure he couldn't know, was that he was now working for his own wife. Carmen had been careful to keep the company name out of their dinner conversations. When Darren asked about her consulting work, she spoke vaguely about financial software projects and algorithm optimization. She never mentioned Innovate Tech by name, never brought company materials home, and conducted all her real business from the executive office that officially belonged to Maya. The hiring process had been deliberately hands-off for Carmen. She'd instructed Jennifer to handle all recruiting for mid-level positions, trusting her COO's judgment, while maintaining her own invisibility. When Jennifer mentioned they'd hired a promising new strategist named Darren Williams, Carmen had simply nodded and asked for his personnel file to be sent to her secure email. Reading through Darren's resume and interview notes, Carmen felt a strange mix of pride and unease. His qualifications were solid, his references strong, and Jennifer's assessment noted his ambitious drive and strategic thinking. But it was the comment about his eagerness to network with senior leadership that made Carmen pause. Within his first month at Innovate Tech, Darren had identified the power players and begun his charm offensive. He lingered near the executive conference rooms, hoping to catch Maya or other senior staff for casual conversations. He volunteered for high-visibility projects and made sure his contributions were noticed during team meetings. "I'm really impressed with the leadership team here," he told Carmen over dinner one evening. "Maya Chin is sharp, but I think there's room for fresh perspectives in the strategic planning department." Carmen nearly choked on her wine. "Oh really? What kind of fresh perspectives?" "Well," Darren leaned back, warming to his favorite topic, himself. "The company's growth has been impressive, but they're thinking too small. I've been analyzing their client acquisition strategy, and there are huge opportunities they're missing in the institutional market." The irony was almost unbearable. Darren was critiquing strategies that Carmen herself had developed, algorithms she'd personally coded, and market approaches she'd spent months perfecting. But she kept her expression neutral, asking innocent questions that let him continue explaining her own business to her. It was around his third month that Carmen first noticed Dana Martinez. A bright 26-year-old junior analyst fresh from Wharton, Dana had joined the quantitative research team and quickly caught Darren's attention. Carmen observed their interactions during the company holiday party. The way Darren positioned himself near Dana during group conversations, his extra attention when she spoke, the subtle flirtation disguised as professional mentoring. "There's this really talented analyst on my team," Darren mentioned casually one evening. "Dana Martinez. Very sharp, great instincts for market trends. I've been thinking about recommending her for some special projects." Carmen's stomach tightened, but she kept her voice level. "That's nice of you to mentor the junior staff." "It's not mentoring," Darren corrected, a slight edge in his voice. "It's recognizing talent and creating opportunities. Something you'd understand if you'd ever worked in a competitive corporate environment." The comment stung, particularly because Carmen was creating opportunities for hundreds of employees, including her own husband. But Darren's tone was becoming increasingly familiar, a patronizing undercurrent that suggested he saw her as intellectually inferior. As winter turned to spring, Darren's attitude at home grew more condescending. When Carmen tried to discuss market trends over dinner, he'd interrupt with explanations of basic concepts she'd mastered years ago. When she mentioned reading about new regulatory changes affecting fintech companies, he'd smile indulgently and say, "That's cute, babe, but the real impact is much more complex than what you read in articles." The breaking point came during a dinner party they hosted for some of Darren's new colleagues. When the conversation turned to algorithmic trading strategies, Carmen offered a thoughtful analysis of how machine learning could improve prediction accuracy for volatile markets. Darren laughed, actually laughed, and patted her hand dismissively. "You wouldn't understand, babe. You've never built anything real. These algorithms require years of experience in quantitative finance, not just reading tech blogs." The room fell silent. Carmen felt heat rising in her cheeks, but not from embarrassment, from rage. The man she'd married was lecturing her about algorithms she'd personally designed, dismissing expertise that had made their company worth over $300 million, treating her like an amateur in the very field where she was pioneering breakthrough innovations. "I see," Carmen said quietly, her voice steady despite the fury building inside her. What Darren didn't realize, as he basked in the approving nods from his colleagues, was that every algorithm he worked with daily bore Carmen's digital signature. Every successful trade his division executed used predictive models she'd spent countless hours perfecting. Every strategic insight he'd been praised for at work originated from frameworks she'd developed before he'd even heard of Innovate Tech. That night, as Darren slept beside her, Carmen stared at the ceiling and made a decision. It was time to see exactly who she'd married. The real test was about to begin. Spring melted into summer, and with it, any pretense of warmth in the Brooks household. Darren came home later each evening, his excuses growing more elaborate and less believable. Client dinners that stretched past midnight. Weekend strategy sessions that somehow required business casual attire and cologne. Emergency meetings that coincidentally aligned with Dana Martinez's schedule. Carmen watched it all with the same analytical precision she applied to market algorithms. She noted the patterns, tracked the inconsistencies, and waited for confirmation of what she already knew. The confirmation came on a humid Tuesday night in July. Carmen had returned early from what Darren believed was a consulting trip to Boston, actually a board meeting in Manhattan where she'd presented Innovate Tech's expansion strategy to potential international partners. She entered their loft quietly, planning to surprise her husband with his favorite takeout from the Thai place downtown. Instead, she heard voices from the bedroom. Darren's voice, low and intimate, mixed with a feminine laugh she recognized from company meetings. "Can't keep doing this," Dana was saying. "It feels wrong sneaking around." "It won't be for much longer," Darren replied, his voice carrying a tone Carmen hadn't heard in months, tender, engaged, alive. "I'm building something here, Dana. At Innovate Tech, I mean. Maya's starting to notice my contributions. Give me 6 more months, and I'll be in senior leadership. Then we can stop pretending." "What about Carmen?" Dana asked, and Carmen found herself holding her breath. Darren's laugh was bitter. "Carmen's dead weight. She's content living off my success, playing with her little consulting projects. She has no real ambition, no understanding of what it takes to build something meaningful. She's..." He paused, searching for words that would cut deeper than any blade. "She's exactly the kind of person who holds ambitious people back." Carmen closed her eyes, feeling something fundamental break inside her chest. Not her heart, that had been cracking for months. Something deeper. The last vestige of hope that the man she'd married still existed beneath the stranger living in her home. She left without making a sound, taking nothing but her purse and the knowledge that her marriage was already over. The next morning brought no apologies, no explanations, no acknowledgement that anything had changed. Darren sat at their marble breakfast counter, scrolling through his phone while eating the expensive granola Carmen bought, as if the previous night's betrayal existed in an alternate universe. "I have a client call this morning," Carmen said, testing him. Darren replied without looking up. "Try not to oversell your capabilities. These tech consultants always promise more than they can deliver." It was the final insult wrapped in casual cruelty. Carmen watched him check his appearance in the hallway mirror, adjusting the tie she'd bought him for Christmas, preparing to go to the company she'd built while planning a future with another woman. That evening, Darren came home with the energy of a man who'd made a decision. He found Carmen reading on the couch, actually reviewing quarterly reports disguised as a novel. "We need to talk," he announced, standing over her with the posture of someone about to deliver a verdict. Carmen closed her book and waited. "This isn't working," Darren continued, pacing now like he was delivering a presentation. "I'm moving up in life, Carmen. Real opportunities are opening up for me at Innovate Tech. I need a partner who understands ambition, who can match my energy and vision." "And I can't do that?" Carmen asked quietly. "Look around." Darren gestured at the luxury loft, the expensive furniture, the life she'd built and paid for. "You're comfortable being mediocre. You're content with your little side projects while I'm building an empire. I need someone who challenges me, who brings something to the table beyond." He waved his hand dismissively. "Whatever it is you do all day." Carmen stood slowly, gathering her dignity like armor. "What exactly are you saying, Darren?" "I'm saying this is over. I want you out. Today." His voice was cold, clinical, as if he were terminating an underperforming employee rather than ending a marriage. "You can stay at Maya's or wherever, but I need space to figure out my next moves. You're holding me back from my potential." For a moment, Carmen almost laughed. The absurdity was overwhelming, being thrown out of her own home by a man who worked for her company, who used algorithms she'd created, who owed his very position to her friend's willingness to participate in Carmen's elaborate disguise. Instead, she nodded once. "I understand." "Good," Darren said, clearly expecting more resistance. "I'll have my lawyer draw up separation papers. You can keep whatever consulting contracts you have, obviously." Carmen walked to the door without taking anything. No clothes, no photographs, no mementos of their 2 years together. At the threshold, she turned back to see Darren already pulling out his phone, probably texting Dana about his newfound freedom. "Goodbye, Darren," she said softly. He waved without looking up, already moving on to his next conquest. What Darren didn't know, as he celebrated his liberation in the penthouse Carmen's money had bought, was that his professional world was about to shift dramatically. That very morning, Carmen had placed a call to Jennifer Walsh, instructing her to initiate a comprehensive leadership audit. Performance reviews, ethics assessments, and detailed evaluations of all mid-level managers were to begin immediately. Focus particularly on strategic innovation and team collaboration, Carmen had instructed. "I want to understand who's actually contributing value and who's just taking credit for others' work." The audit would reveal everything: Darren's plagiarized proposals, his inappropriate relationship with a junior employee, his tendency to claim credit for ideas generated by his team. But more than that, it would give Carmen the perfect opportunity to step out of the shadows. As she sat in Maya's guest room that night, Carmen felt something she hadn't experienced in months: anticipation. Tomorrow, the real game would begin. 3 weeks after Carmen's quiet exit from the loft, Darren walked into Innovate Tech's offices to find the atmosphere had shifted. Where casual conversations once flowed freely between departments, employees now spoke in hushed tones, glancing nervously toward the executive floor. Security badges were being updated, access levels recalibrated, and new protocols appeared daily in everyone's email inboxes. "What's with all the changes?" Darren asked Marcus, a senior developer who'd been with the company since its early days. Marcus lowered his voice conspiratorially. "Word is there's some kind of strategic review happening. Big investors getting involved, asking tough questions about operations and leadership." Darren felt a flicker of unease but pushed it aside. If anything, increased investor scrutiny would highlight his contributions over the past year. His division had exceeded targets, his client relationships were solid, and several of his strategic recommendations had been implemented successfully. He was exactly the kind of ambitious talent that serious investors would want to retain and promote. The first official communication came on a Monday morning, a company-wide memo from Maya Chen's office, marked "Confidential all staff." Subject: Strategic Board Review and Leadership Assessment. Dear InnovateTech team, as we prepare for our next phase of growth, we are conducting a comprehensive review of all operations, leadership structures, and strategic initiatives. This process will include individual assessments of all managers and key personnel. Additionally, we will be hosting meetings with our anonymous founding investor, who has remained behind the scenes since our inception but will now take a more active role in shaping our future direction. Please maintain the highest standards of professionalism during this period. All personnel decisions will be based on demonstrated performance, ethical conduct, and alignment with our core values. Further details will follow shortly. Best regards, Maya Chen, CEO. Darren read the memo twice, his coffee growing cold as he processed the implications. An anonymous founding investor? In all his research about InnovateTech, he'd never heard mention of a silent partner. Maya Chen was listed as the primary founder, with various institutional investors holding minority stakes. Who was this mysterious figure, and why were they emerging now? More concerning was the emphasis on ethical conduct. Darren's relationship with Dana had been discreet, but office affairs weren't uncommon in high-pressure environments. Still, the timing felt ominous. His concerns intensified when he noticed subtle changes in how colleagues interacted with him. Jennifer Walsh, the COO who'd hired him, was polite but distant during team meetings. His proposals, once received with enthusiasm, now faced more scrutiny and follow-up questions. It felt like being slowly frozen out of inner circles he'd worked months to penetrate. The axe fell on a Thursday afternoon. Darren was reviewing client reports when he saw Dana cleaning out her desk, a security guard standing nearby with practiced patience. "What's happening?" he asked, approaching her workstation with forced casualness. Dana's eyes were red-rimmed, her voice barely a whisper. "Restructuring. They said my position was redundant." She glanced around nervously, then leaned closer. "Darren, they asked me about us. During the exit interview. They asked specific questions about professional relationships and whether I felt any pressure from senior colleagues." The blood drained from Darren's face. "What did you tell them?" "The truth," Dana replied, her voice breaking. "I'm sorry, but I couldn't lie. My career is over if I get blacklisted for dishonesty." Darren watched helplessly as Dana walked toward the elevators, her cardboard box of personal items a stark reminder of how quickly corporate favor could disappear. The security guard nodded politely as she passed, but Darren caught the man's eyes lingering on him afterward, a look that suggested his own movements were being noted and reported. Friday morning brought the final blow, an email marked "Urgent Confidential" in his inbox. "Mr. Williams, you are required to attend a performance review meeting on Monday, August 15th at 9 a.m. in Conference Room A. This assessment will address concerns regarding strategic performance, team collaboration, and adherence to company policies regarding professional conduct and workplace relationships. Please bring any documentation relevant to your project contributions over the past 12 months. Sincerely, Human Resources Department. P.S. This review will be conducted in the presence of senior leadership and our founding investor." Darren's hands trembled as he read the email. The language was clinical, but the subtext was clear: he was being investigated. Dana's termination wasn't random restructuring, it was surgical removal of evidence. And now they were coming for him. Panic overrode pride as Darren stormed through the office corridors toward Maya's corner suite. Employees scattered from his path, their expressions mixing sympathy with relief that they weren't the target of whatever storm was brewing. He burst through Maya's office door without knocking, finding her calmly reviewing documents at her glass desk. "What the hell is going on?" Darren demanded, his voice echoing off the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Dana's gone. I'm being called in for some bogus performance review, And now there's this mysterious founding investor nobody's ever heard of. Maya looked up slowly, her expression unreadable. She'd always been composed, but there was something different in her demeanor now, a quiet confidence that bordered on smugness. "I'm sorry you're feeling anxious, Darren," she said, her tone professionally sympathetic. "But all personnel matters are handled according to company policy and investor directives." "Investor directives?" Darren's voice cracked. "Who is this founding investor? Why are they suddenly involving themselves in day-to-day operations?" Maya leaned back in her chair, studying Darren as if he were a particularly interesting specimen under a microscope. "All will be revealed at your review meeting Monday morning." "That's not good enough." Darren slammed his hand on her desk, making her coffee cup rattle. "I've given this company everything over the past year. My strategic insights, my client relationships, my dedication. I deserve to know what's happening." "Your dedication," Maya repeated softly, as if tasting the words. Interesting choice of words. "What's that supposed to mean?" Maya stood, walking to her window with the fluid grace of someone who held all the cards. When she turned back to face him, her smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "You'll find out tomorrow morning, Darren. 9 a.m. sharp. Don't be late." The dismissal was absolute. Darren stood frozen for a moment, processing the shift in power dynamics he couldn't quite comprehend. Maya Chin, who'd always been respectful of his input and eager for his strategic insights, was now looking at him like he was already gone. As he walked back to his desk, Darren's mind raced through possibilities. Had someone discovered his relationship with Dana? Had his strategic recommendations been questioned by higher-ups? Was this mysterious founding investor cleaning house before a major expansion? What he couldn't imagine, as he sat in his ergonomic chair staring at algorithms that bore another woman's digital signature, was that tomorrow morning he would finally meet the architect of his professional life, and discover that she'd been sleeping beside him for 2 years. The ghost in the system was about to become very, very real. Monday morning arrived gray and drizzling, matching Darren's mood as he stood outside conference room A at exactly 8:58 a.m. He'd spent the weekend rehearsing his defense, gathering documentation of his contributions, and preparing to face whatever anonymous investor had decided to meddle in his career. His hands were steady as he straightened his tie, the same silk tie Carmen had complimented months ago, back when she still looked at him with something resembling affection. The irony of wearing her gift to what might be his professional execution wasn't lost on him, but he'd pushed the thought aside. Personal drama had no place in corporate warfare. At precisely 9 a.m., Darren knocked twice and entered the conference room. The space was Innovateca's crown jewel, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan's financial district, a polished mahogany table that could seat 20, and walls lined with awards and industry recognitions. But Darren's attention immediately focused on the figure seated at the head of the table. Carmen. Not the Carmen who'd meekly accepted his dismissal 3 weeks ago. Not the Carmen who'd quietly endured his condescension and professional mansplaining. This was someone entirely different, poised, commanding, radiating the kind of quiet authority that came from absolute power. She wore a tailored black suit that probably cost more than his monthly salary, her hair pulled back in an elegant chignon that emphasized the sharp intelligence in her dark eyes. Her posture was perfect, her hands folded calmly on the table, her expression unreadable but unmistakably in control. For several seconds, Darren's brain simply refused to process what he was seeing. Carmen couldn't be here. Carmen didn't work at Innovatec. Carmen was a small-time consultant with modest ambitions and limited understanding of high-level corporate strategy. "Please sit down," Carmen said, her voice steady and professional. Darren remained frozen in the doorway. What are you doing here? Where's the investor? Where's Maya?" "Sit down, Darren." This time it wasn't a request. He stumbled to the chair across from her, his mind racing through impossible explanations. Maybe Carmen was here as his wife, trying to advocate for him. Maybe she'd somehow convinced Maya to let her speak on his behalf. Maybe this was all some elaborate misunderstanding. "I imagine you're confused," Carmen began, opening a thick folder that sat before her. "Let me clarify the situation for you." She removed a document and slid it across the table. Darren's eyes scanned the corporate filing, his face growing pale as he processed the information. Innovate Tech Solutions Incorporated founding documents. And there, listed as the primary shareholder and strategic chair, was a name he recognized but had never connected: C. Brooks Holdings, LLC. "You see, Darren, when I founded this company 3 years ago, I made a very deliberate choice to remain invisible. I let Maya be the public face while I controlled the technology, the strategy, and the vision." Carmen's voice was calm, almost conversational. "Every algorithm you've worked with, every predictive model that's made your division successful, every strategic framework you've praised, I created them." Darren's mouth moved soundlessly, his brain struggling to reconcile this revelation with everything he thought he knew. "But let's discuss your performance," Carmen continued, removing additional documents from the folder. "Over the past 12 months, you've submitted 17 strategic proposals. Our analysis shows that 12 of them were plagiarized from existing internal documents or junior staff recommendations. You simply repackaged other people's ideas and presented them as your own innovations." She slid the evidence across the table, side-by-side comparisons of Darren's proposals with their original sources, time-stamps proving the chronology, email threads showing him claiming credit for collaborative work. "Then there's your expense account," Carmen continued relentlessly. "Dinners for two charged as client meetings when you were actually entertaining Dana Martinez. Hotel rooms booked for strategic planning sessions that coincidentally aligned with her travel schedule. Weekend expenses that violated both our ethics policy and your marriage vows." Darren finally found his voice, though it came out as a croak. "Carmen, I can explain. I'm not finished." Her tone cut through his protests like ice. "We also have documentation of your pattern of inappropriate behavior toward junior female staff. Dana Martinez wasn't your first target, just your most recent. HR has detailed complaints about your tendency to take credit for women's ideas while simultaneously undermining their confidence and expertise." She leaned forward slightly, her eyes never leaving his face. "Sound familiar, Darren? That pattern of dismissing women's intelligence while benefiting from their work?" The room felt like it was spinning. Darren gripped the edge of the table, trying to anchor himself to reality. "You can't, this isn't. How is this possible? I built this company from nothing," Carmen said, her voice gaining strength with each word. "I created the technology that generates millions in revenue. I developed the strategies that made us industry leaders. I assembled the team that's been supporting your mediocre career for the past year. And through it all, you looked me in the eye every night and told me I wouldn't understand real business." She stood slowly, her presence filling the room like a gathering storm. "You threw me out of our home, my home, purchased with money from my company, because you said I was holding you back from your potential. You called me dead weight while working with algorithms I designed. You dismissed my intelligence while benefiting from my innovations." Darren tried to speak, to protest, to explain, but Carmen held up a hand that stopped him cold. "As founder and strategic chair of Innovate Tech Solutions, I have authorized your immediate termination for cause. Effective today, you are dismissed from my company." She paused, letting the words sink in before delivering the final blow. "You threw me out like I was nothing, Darren. But the ground you walk on, I built it." The silence that followed was deafening. Darren sat motionless, his world completely inverted, everything he thought he knew revealed as illusion. Carmen pressed a button on the conference room phone. "Security, please escort Mr. Williams from the building. He is no longer employed here." As footsteps approached in the hallway, Carmen gathered her documents with business-like efficiency, preparing to rebuild the empire her husband had never even realized existed. The elevator doors opened to reveal 2 security guards, professional, polite, but unmistakably final in their purpose. Darren looked between them and Carmen, his face cycling through disbelief, anger, and something approaching devastation. Ms. Brooks," one guard said respectfully. "We're here for Mr. Williams." Carmen nodded once. "Thank you, Marcus." Please ensure Mr. Williams' access credentials are deactivated and escort him to collect any personal items from his workstation. Darren stood shakily, his legs unsteady beneath him. Carmen, please. We can talk about this. We can work something out. For the first time since he'd entered the conference room, Carmen's composed mask slipped slightly. Not into anger or vindictiveness, but into something sadder, a glimpse of the woman who'd once loved him enough to share her life, if not her secrets. We did talk, Darren. Every night for 2 years. And you made it very clear what you thought of me. She straightened, the CEO mask sliding back into place. Goodbye. The walk through Innovate Tech's open-plan office was a study in corporate theater. Word had already spread through the building's invisible networks. The executive assistant who'd seen Darren storm into Maya's office, the HR manager who'd processed his termination paperwork, the security guards who'd been briefed on the situation. Employees lined the pathways like witnesses to a funeral procession, their faces carefully neutral but their eyes tracking every step. Some watched with curiosity, mid-level managers wondering if they were next on the chopping block. Others observed with barely concealed satisfaction, junior staff who'd watched Darren take credit for their innovations, female colleagues who'd endured his patronizing explanations of their own expertise. A few seemed genuinely shocked, having bought into Darren's carefully crafted image of rising corporate star. At his desk, Darren mechanically packed the few personal items that mattered: a coffee mug from his previous company, a framed photo of himself at a conference, a small plant that Carmen had bought him for his first day. The irony of that gift, his wife celebrating his employment at her own company, would have been funny if it weren't so devastating. Maya appeared beside the security guards, her expression professionally sympathetic but with steel underneath. I'll need your laptop, access cards, and any company materials, she said gently. As Darren handed over the tools of his professional identity, Maya leaned closer and spoke quietly. For what it's worth, your strategic thinking wasn't terrible. It was the ethics and ego that were the problem. The elevator ride to the lobby stretched eternally. When the doors opened onto the marble foyer where Darren had walked so confidently just over a year ago, he paused at the threshold. Everything looked the same, the gleaming surfaces, the company logo etched in silver, the bustling energy of a successful enterprise. But now he understood that none of it had ever been his world. He'd been a tourist in someone else's kingdom, mistaking hospitality for ownership. 24 floors above, Carmen stood in what had officially been Maya's office until 30 minutes ago. Maya had moved her belongings to the adjoining suite that morning, finally allowing her best friend to step into the role she'd always deserved. How does it feel? Maya asked, setting down a cup of Carmen's favorite tea. Terrifying, Carmen admitted, running her fingers along the edge of the desk where she'd make decisions affecting hundreds of employees and millions of dollars. Liberating. Overwhelming. She paused, looking out at the Manhattan skyline that now felt like a view of her domain rather than someone else's success. Right. Over the following weeks, Carmen's transformation of Innovate Tech was swift and strategic. She promoted 3 women to senior leadership positions, including Dr. Sarah Chin, a brilliant algorithmic designer who'd been overlooked for advancement under the previous structure. She launched the Brooks Fellowship, a mentorship program specifically designed to support women of color entering fintech, providing not just funding but strategic guidance and networking opportunities that Carmen wished she'd had starting out. The company's culture shifted subtly but significantly. The casual dismissal of women's ideas became professionally unacceptable. Credit for innovations was meticulously tracked and properly attributed. The boys' club atmosphere that had allowed Darren to flourish while undermining others was systematically dismantled and replaced with collaborative excellence. Within 24 hours of his termination, Darren Williams' name vanished from every company document, every project credit, every strategic initiative he'd claimed as his own. It was as if he never existed in Innovate Tech's ecosystem, which, Carmen reflected, was closer to the truth than anyone had realized. 3 months later, Darren was grabbing coffee from a Starbucks in Midtown when he saw the magazine display. Carmen's face stared back at him from the cover of Forbes, her expression confident and serene beneath the headline. The Silent Architect: How Carmen Brooks Built a Billion-Dollar Empire from the Shadows. He bought the magazine with trembling hands, reading the story of his ex-wife's incredible journey from Goldman Sachs prodigy to fintech revolutionary. The article detailed her innovative algorithms, her strategic vision, and her deliberate choice to remain invisible until the time was right to step into the spotlight. It mentioned Innovateca's meteoric rise, their recent acquisition of 2 smaller competitors, and their plans for international expansion. There was no mention of Darren Williams anywhere in the article. Standing on the sidewalk with Manhattan's financial district gleaming around him, Darren finally understood the magnitude of what he'd lost. Carmen hadn't just built a company, she'd architected a revolution. She hadn't raised her voice in anger or descended to petty revenge. Instead, she'd raised a kingdom, and he'd never even seen the crown. The woman he'd dismissed as dead weight was now reshaping an entire industry, empowering others who'd been overlooked and underestimated, building legacies that would outlast any individual career or relationship. Carmen Brooks had never needed his approval, his guidance, or his ambition. She'd always been exactly what she told him she was on that first night they met: brilliant, strategic, and quietly revolutionary. The only thing she'd never been was his. Span had never even realized existed.